Thank you, everybody, for coming. Good evening. I want to welcome all of you to this evening's event, Before Development is a Done Deal, Empowering Residents with ArcGIS Visualization. My name is Shelley Repp. I am chair of the Committee of 100 on the Federal City. The committee was founded 100 years ago to sustain and safeguard the fundamental values of the L'Enfant and Macmillan plans that give the nation's capital much of its distinction, beauty, and rich community character. Urban planning is central to our mission, but what we need are better tools to understand how proposed developments will affect our communities. As I said, this is our centennial year, 100th anniversary. We're marking this milestone by holding a series of what we are calling conversations, focusing on some of our city's challenges. Meg McGuire will introduce our speakers and moderate the question and answer period. Meg joined the Committee of 100 in 2006 after a career in community conservation and the U.S. Department of Interior and Scenic America. She played a role in the publication of Building a World-Class Streetcar System for a World-Class City and the 2021 publication of Unmasking the Rewrite, How to Make the Comprehensive Plan Work for D.C. She also had a role in planning this wonderful structure. So thanks to Meg. Currently, she serves as co-chair of the Committee of 100's Housing Subcommittee. I'm sure Meg will repeat this, but during the question and answer period, please keep your questions brief and germane to the topics of this evening's event. After the program, please join us for refreshments and conversation in the narthex. Committee of 100 members are identified by badges like this, and we invite you all to talk to any of us to learn more about our organization. We welcome new members. With that, please welcome Meg McGuire.
Well, good evening. You have braved the red alert, and our building manager assures me that there's no air from outside being circulated in the building. It's just all being recirculated. So, yeah, it's safer in here than out there. Well, good evening. Too often, DC residents feel that development decisions are made with very little communication about the visual and infrastructure impacts on their immediate neighborhoods and on the greater surroundings. While developers use sophisticated design tools to present their proposals, DC's public agencies have not to date employed these same technologies in any significant way to interact with communities, seek local wisdom, or model alternative scenarios. I am happy to report that we are on the cusp of an exciting change. Cities throughout the world now routinely use sophisticated visualization tools to achieve far greater community engagement and to study impacts before development is a done deal. Our speakers tonight will present an overview of ArcGIS CityEngine and urban applications and a preview of how the DC Office of Planning is preparing to engage residents in looking at change before it occurs. Keith, welcome. Keith Cooke is the Global Industry Manager for Planning and Community Development at ESRI, the company that develops ArcGIS. A geographic information specialist since 1994, he has worked as a planner and GIS manager in a number of planning and community development agencies. Keith, we are so grateful to you for coming all the way from Alabama to speak to us. Anita Cozart is the director of the DC Office of Planning, with wide-ranging responsibilities for updating the comprehensive plan, developing small area plans and neighborhood assessments, design guidelines, and much more. And currently, she is in charge of the Streets for People program to activate downtown public spaces and support economic recovery. Unlike many jurisdictions, the DC Office of Planning also serves as staff to the Zoning Commission as advisors on physical development. Anita, we are eager to hear how your office plans to use ArcGIS to engage residents so that we can come to share a common visual understanding of development requirements, constraints, and possibilities for our great city. Keith?
So, well, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it. I'm always happy to be here. As I told Meg and Carol earlier, I grew up across the river in Alexandria, and then down in Stafford when Stafford was considered the country. That is no longer the case. Let me go ahead and start. I've got a 86 slide PowerPoint deck to go through here. I was just going to see who was going to get up and run away. So, no, I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't do that to me. All right. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to talk a little bit about how GIS is really enabling a more geographic approach to planning and community development. So we're going to hit on some key concepts first, and then I'm going to walk you through some real life examples of how, and very modern examples for that matter, of how GIS is being used in planning departments today, specifically to visualize and analyze developments. So our communities today are really facing a number of different challenges, and the projects that have to be prioritized really vary. But one of the great things that I get to do with my job is I get to work with planning departments from across the nation, actually across the world. And so this is kind of a common list of the most common list of projects that are out there for planning departments to have to deal with. Right now, comp plan updates are a real issue because we're still seeing many cities and counties that are backlogged from the pandemic when they needed to be doing their comp plan updates. They didn't have staff in-house, or their consultants weren't in-house, and it really hindered the ability to perform those updates. Zoning reform and housing policy are very hot topics right now in this field. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's so few, their housing affordability is such an issue. This is driven by a lack of housing capacity as well. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Improving public participation is also becoming key because we're seeing planning departments are understanding, I can't just have people show up, say that the only time you can show up is Tuesday at 7 o'clock for the planning commission meeting. Because just because people can't show up for that doesn't mean they don't care about their community. So we have to find innovative ways to allow the public to feel that they're engaged. When I first started out in planning and in GIS, really the only way for planners to use GIS was to purchase a full-blown desktop license, which really required a beefy machine to be able to run. You couldn't run it off the laptops of those days. And it also meant, lots of training and so forth. And it was a big investment. So a lot of times planners were just sort of deferring a lot of these responsibilities to GIS managers, which as a former GIS manager, I appreciated. But the problem is at the time, I wasn't really a subject matter expert in this. The good news today is that simple web and mobile apps are available for planners so they can apply their subject matter expertise and use these geospatial tools without being GIS experts. So this provides really frictionless access for them to be able to visualize and analyze proposed developments, again, without making a big investment in GIS software or high-end hardware to be able to run it. So when we talk about a geographic approach to planning, to community development, it really is there are 5 cornerstones to this. And the first one is being able to understand neighborhood characteristics. Richard Saul Wurman, the founder of the TED Talks, had a great, very simple quote. Sometimes those are the best ones, and said, understanding precedes action. Well, that's true in planning, right? So we need to be able to understand the demographics the socioeconomic characteristics, the businesses that are around, the tapestry of our communities before we go charging in with plans. And so we do this in the ESRI platform with ArcGIS Community Analyst. We also have to be able to derive business intelligence from our systems. Now, the system of record in just about every planning department is going to be the permitting system. But typically, you're going to have a smaller group that actually uses the permitting system and inputs data, yet the entire department would benefit from having access to it. So what we can do with GIS is, regardless of what the permitting system is, we can use the GIS to essentially geo-enable that system to generate more value from it, right? So that we can understand patterns and trends over time. The images you're looking at here on the left are actually from Montgomery County, Maryland. And just to give you a little behind the scenes peek, this was data that was on their open data site. And it was a spreadsheet of commercial permits that had been issued since 2010. I literally took this spreadsheet and dragged and dropped it into ArcGIS Insights, and then from there was able to create these tree maps, a permit status, and so forth. So again, as someone that doesn't work in the permitting system, this is still going to show me some patterns that are going on over time, over certain areas and certain types of developments. More and more planners today are participating, as they should have for a long time, in policy development. So we're seeing a lot more city administrations, county administrations, regional governments, and so forth reaching out to planners to be key participants in these policy developments. And so it's key for planners to be able to take a data-driven approach to driving these policies. So we do this within our platform using the ArcGIS Living Atlas, and there's a section in there called ESRI Maps for Public Policy. You can see the URL there, esri.com/policy maps. This is a free resource where we have curated content, maps that are already created, that allows you to be able to go in and see specific types of themes. So for instance, in this one, we're seeing households that in the Fort Worth, Dallas Metroplex that are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, which is typically a red flag. And then I think one of the really important things also is the necessity of supporting civic inclusion. As I mentioned, just because someone doesn't come to the Planning Commission meeting doesn't mean that they have no stake or buy-in or need to have any buy-in on the proposed developments that are up there. And so modern planning departments are finding that they need to make sure that their online presence through things like ArcGIS Hub and ArcGIS Story Maps are stronger, so that they not only can inform the public, but have a way to be able to get input back from them, so that they can create a dialogue and hopefully essentially a real partnership between the public and their planning department. And finally, GIS, this geographic approach, helps us to empower scenario planning and design. And what this means is that planners can now play out different development scenarios. So let's say a developer comes in and says, I have a proposal for redeveloping this parcel. And we can say, okay, well, right now you want this to be 3-store multifamily. What if we were to make it 5 stories and made it a mixed use development, with the first floor being commercial or office space, so forth? What would that look like? How many additional people would we add? How many households? How many jobs would we add? What would be the impact on traffic, on utilities, on tax revenue, and so forth? GIS allows us to be able to play out those scenarios now with tools like ArcGIS Urban and really strong visualization tools like ArcGIS CityEngine. So what ArcGIS is really doing is it's helping us planning departments transform the way that they do work by embracing this geographic approach, so that, from everything from their day-to-day operations and current planning to the long-range planning, comp plan updates, policy development for the code enforcement for both zoning code and building inspections, getting more out of the permitting system, making sure more of the public are included. GIS is an integral part of all of this that makes that happen. All right, so let me, this is my contact information. By the way, feel free to email me or go to our website to get some more information. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and show some examples of how this actually works. So this first example is in Fresno, California, where we're going to do some fiscal analysis of a proposed development. We're going to take a bunch of different factors and see what we're going to bring in terms of sales tax revenue for a proposed mixed-use development. So in this case, we're doing a simple drawing of what the proposed development could look like. We have our dimensions in here, and we can see right now that it's in residential multi-housing, and now we're going to change this to commercial retail on the first floor, and then on the second, third, and fourth floors, we're going to add medium family residential, and we can see now the impact of these proposed developments. We can see the impact in terms of total revenue based on space, right? Obviously, we'll get more revenue from the commercial space at the bottom. And then we can see what the proposed development would look like differently if we had gone with just a more dense housing, right? We're not going to have quite as many units. We're not going to have as many people, not as many households, and certainly not the total net impact that we would have with the mixed-use development. So this is how we can play out and compare these different scenarios. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward this video to a situation in Boston, Massachusetts, and show you how this how GIS is being used there using virtual reality. So the view that you're going to get here is actually what it would look like inside a VR headset. So we're looking at a potential development here, and we're going to look at it from multiple viewpoints. So we can see the numbers you see down there are the different vantage points. So I could click on 5 and be able to see a specific view. This is using CityEngine, so you can see the realism. The trees are swaying in the breeze. We have people walking in the park. The black car there taking the most awkward and slowest right turn ever, right? And then I can see, okay, what would a refined look like? The existing versus the refined look like, and I can compare those two one after the other, sort of using a swipe tool. In this case, we're going to look at a museum, and we're going to look at this, and we can also bring in weather conditions. So I can say, well, what would this look like on a rainy day or on a snowy day or sunny? What would it look like in March as opposed to October with the different azimuth of the sun and then the different angles of the sun, and what would the shadow impacts be? So now what we're going to do is actually look at a development in Glen Ellen, Illinois. This is a quaint village outside of Chicago. They were very wary about new developments, but they had an opportunity to bring in a development and wanted to see what it would look like. So again, using CityEngine, using a gaming engine called Unreal, very popular in the video game world, we can actually create almost like a video game experience here. So we're looking at a proposed development here for a mixed-use development where we have medium density residential parking and commercial underneath, switching back and forth between existing and proposed to see what that area would look like. So we're going to go to a different part of the map here where they have four different developments that they're looking at. This is a parking lot now, but the proposed development, again, for a mixed use development with medium density residential and commercial and office space on the first floor. Again, we're able to toggle back and forth and see, okay, what would this look like in context with the rest of the surrounding neighborhood? Right. So it doesn't just sit on an island. There's actually context to it. Same thing here. We're going to go and look at different vantage points here. So we're looking at a proposed revision for, again, medium density residential here across from an historic building. Just wanted to be able to see what that would look like. And again, we can look at it from multiple vantage points. Then the last one we're going to look at is with the city of Morrisville, North Carolina. And so they had a great story here. I'm going to pause this real quick before we get into it. One of the projects that they were looking at was a scenario for their town center, and for years they debated whether they wanted 2 stories or 3, 3 stories or 4, and so forth. And instead of coming to a conclusion, there was just a lot of arguing going back and forth. Well, by using GIS, they were able to actually visualize this from multiple vantage points and make it look realistic. And not only make it look realistic, but actually tie real data to it. And that's what you're going to see here in this. So we're going to have our our resident here kind of looking around, and we're going to go up the sidewalk a little bit. And then again, as we're looking, we're going to see a scenario here. And as you do, you can see the details, the data that's tied to this, the proposed number of dwelling units, the land use, the solar generation from the panels on top of the roof. We're going to go look at this from another vantage point from this corner. And again, we can click on this, see more information. Okay, this is what it would look like if we made this 4 stories. Excuse me. What would our solar generation be? What would the parking requirements be? Of course, we've got the parking deck to accommodate that. There's also a hotel in here. We could add a space for lodging as well. So what could these developments look like? One, but then also, what would the impacts be, both financially and in terms of dwelling units, in terms of usage, in terms of parking, in terms of revenue generation, all of that. And what would it look like in different parts of the day? Again, doing shadow and line of sight analysis. And again, this is all GIS being able to do this. So again, now we're going to do a bit of a fly through. So we're going to run over here. Actually, fly through is one of the options. We're going to, again, click on a space because these aren't just pretty pictures. There's actually data tied to every bit of this, right? So we can see the address of where we are. You can even tie data to the trees if you so choose. All right. So this is a really powerful way to gain buy-in from proposed developments and be able to have everyone on the same page. They're all looking at the same authoritative data. And so the output for this was really just a video. And so nothing terribly complicated. And so the people that wanted to view it didn't have to have any specific software. They were just looking at this through a video. So a very impactful way to be able to tell your story. I'm going to put my contact information up here one more time. Here it is. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I really appreciate your time today and look forward to working with you and coming to meet with you again in the very near future. Thank you very much. With that, Meg, pass it back to you or to Anita. Anita. Here he is. There we go.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you to Meg and Carol for the kind invitation. I'm excited to be able to join you all this evening. So I want to share a little bit about the things that we're doing at the Office of Planning that really help folks visualize what development looks like and can look like. Just as a backdrop, we're really focused in on accessibility, racial equity, and impact. And those are some guiding principles for us, really thinking about making sure our work products are accessible and we understand where we are today and we have a sense of kind of where we need to go and how tools like this and others are ones we need to marshal. We're working to bring racial equity fully into our work, both as a process and also as an outcome. And we're also really thinking about a focus on impact, really understanding how disaggregated data, meaningful community engagement, and collaborative strategies really are ones that we need to think about and incorporate to get at the impact that we seek. So I wanted to first contextualize the conversation by saying that when we think about visualization, this is a key part of our overall community engagement approach. And for us, when we think about community engagement, we think about 3 things. Who's the audience for our efforts? How do we reach that audience? And what outcomes are we hoping to achieve? And so when we think about audience, we think about demographics is very important to us, and we use data that we can marshal to think about that. And we also think beyond that about kind of community-based data that we can get to be able to inform who the audience is. And that also applies to how we reach the audience as well. And we also think about evaluation of how our work or how our community engagement work is going, and are we meeting, are we hitting the metrics that are necessary for that? So, okay, so we really value how public input and feedback that's collected from the engagement process informs the plans and the policies that we put forward, and we understand the importance of visualizations as an important way to reach an audience and really demonstrate the purposes and what we see coming out of a planning effort. So some of the approaches that we really take are around presenting information and graphic diagrams through open houses and workshops, and that fits well for some people and some processes. For other people and other processes, it's better to think about one-on-one conversations and small group conversations among would-be participants. We also know that for some people, the conditions of their life mean that feedback through online surveys and virtual formats is just really best for them and best suited for them. And we also recognize it's really important to go meet people where they're at. And really, and those are events that are hosted by community members, farmers markets, neighborhood festivals, that kind of thing. I also think it's important to just raise for your attention that we're using the Mayor's Office of Racial Equity's Meaningful Engagement Guide. And there may be some of you in the audience who've actually helped to contribute to that guide. And so we're using that information to help us think about the sets of approaches that we'll take. As it relates to the visualizations that we use in our engagement processes, I wanted to just share, kind of how we think of the spectrum of those visualizations, right? So massing diagrams, this is really how you think about kind of the building form and how it fits in the scale of the surrounding context. And we typically use software like SketchUp in-house to be able to kind of show whether it's alternative scenarios or just give a sense of that massing in the context of other, what's surrounding it. We also create some renderings through SketchUp and Adobe Creative Suite. And these are helpful for really thinking about kind of that realistic view that Keith was talking about. Gets you to building materials. It gets you to streetscape conditions and what you would experience kind of walking down the street. We also, a cousin of that is hand color renderings, which really help us get even deeper into those architectural elements and the materials and even your streetscape materials that you might use. This is really about helping a viewer visualize the look and the feel, kind of the texture of a place. And then certainly kind of site plan studies that we create through ArcGIS, SketchUp, Adobe Creative Suite, a combination of those really help us kind of identify that overall long-term vision. What are some opportunity sites? What are some places that we think about for specific attention? And they don't stand alone. They're really intended to help you orient yourself, especially when you're talking about a long corridor or a large area. And these are typically kind of aerial views. The other visualization planning, we also use ArcGIS story maps. And this is really telling a narrative about a place or an idea, and it uses maps. And we've used this a number of times. And in one case, or a few cases, we've used them, and they serve well as a virtual walking tour. But there's others that are out there, like our Streets for People initiative downtown. It's a great and easy way for people to get a sense of a overall project and the goals and impact and that kind of thing. So when it comes up to kind of the work around that we're doing around deployment for the district, we see this, certainly we see ArcGIS Urban as a really important tool in the toolbox for a lot of the reasons that Keith laid out. We see that if you think about massing scenarios and different ways that you could show massing, and that would be without the texture that you're talking about, and moving that through scenarios, we see that this idea of how many housing units would you generate, what are the infrastructure and all those jobs that are created, and those kinds of things are great to be able to see, and being able to apply things like our inclusionary zoning rules and what would that look like in real time related to potential new development. This could also help you toggle between kind of a corridor-wide look as well as a just very site-specific look. Again, all these, it's important for us to remember all these are hypothetical based on what land use and zoning allows, and then what are the site conditions. But ultimately, there's a whole set of processes that, approval processes that have to happen. So that just because we see it come through on ArcGIS Urban doesn't necessarily mean there are other ways to shape and mold it, et cetera. So I did want to, so also sharing about our deployment, a big part of it is really about thinking about making sure that we've got the right kind of base map, right? So it's important to have your parcels, it's important to have your zoning, it's important to be able to have trees and a whole host of other kind of base map pieces. And so that that requires us to work certainly with the Office of the Chief Technology Office in DC. And it requires us to make sure that we are both preparing but also maintaining those data sets as they change. The parcel data, that's important to keep that up to date, and our zoning code parameters as they change, that needs to be maintained in a real-time condition as well, so that we're giving accurate information as we're thinking about these scenarios. So there are some resources, and I'm happy to share that, but in the interest of time, just let you know about kind of what we're looking at, what's ahead for us as we think about deeper use of this. We understand that our past practice has been really around static visualizations, and we understand both the frustrations that we've had internally, but certainly we've also heard very loud and clear from residents that we want more. And absolutely, we completely agree. And so really some key steps for us are really around kind of the data that I mentioned, really refining and updating that data and making sure those data sets, that's not always up to us. You know, that's where that partnership with the Office of the Chief Technology Officer comes in. And so just making sure that is accurate. We're also building our own internal expertise inside the agency. We have some people who that is their day-to-day. They are the one in front of the computer, right, like really maintaining. You may have called up some of our staff to get a map before, and so they've got that expertise, right? And they are also working to kind of bring that expertise across the agency. That does take some time. It certainly takes some training. It just certainly takes some hands-on opportunities, which we are giving to folks. The other thing that I'm excited about and very interested in is making sure that we're certainly taking advantage of the training provided by ESRI, and also there's some shared learning communities that we can be a part of, even in this region, to really, and other agencies, so that we can all kind of share our learnings and avoid pitfalls, and also make sure that we're pushing at the leading edge. The other thing that we're really trying to do is just making sure that we're thinking about how a resource like this, and coupled with other resources, can really be helpful in decision making that happens with the Zoning Commission, the Board of Zoning Adjustments, the Historic Preservation Review Board. We're in the initial phases of really thinking about what that might be, and I'm very curious in our dialogue to hear ideas that folks have about that. And then what we will be rolling out in our planning efforts, place-based planning efforts on Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue and in Ivy City, is really thinking or bringing in the massing diagrams and the renderings, as opposed to kind of the static images we've used for previous plans, like bringing those in to provide really side-by-side comparisons so that folks are participating in those. And so that's essentially, I don't want to say a pilot because those are real actual plans that will go before council, but that's kind of our first foray into this, and give us a chance to really think about neighborhood impacts, housing opportunities, and that kind of thing. So we also definitely see potential for this to be used in the 2025 comp plan rewrite. That's another thing that I hope in our dialogue, folks will ask questions or give comments about that. That is something that we'd like to, and that's another reason for our planners to really build out the expertise to be able to do that, because that's going to be a big effort. So that is, the other thing, and that's why, again, I'm glad to be here, is really for us to think about the logistics of how this works, right? VR goggles, who may want to wear them, not want to wear them. How do we bring this technology right alongside where we have posters where people put dots on a map, because an analog approach is most comfortable. So finding that right approach, that's something we want to hear from folks about, but we also want to make sure that we're geared up and can use our resources in the right way. We don't want to just be deploying something, have a workshop that's oriented one way and people walk in and walk right out because they don't feel like it's for them. So that is some work that we want to cultivate and start to get right, so that when it's time to have the conversations about the 2025 comp plan, we'll be ready. So that's what I've got, and I'm looking forward to the dialogue.
Great. This stuff's got great potential in the city. You're going to have a lot of support to use it fully. So this is the time for questions. This isn't the time for statements or a lot of context. And the question should really focus on the use of these tools. I know we're all very eager to ask Anita particularly lots of local questions, but please save those and talk to her afterwards. So really focus your questions on visual tools. You can use the microphone here at the stand if you want to line up there for your questions. And I'm going to start us off with a question for each one of you. What are the biggest challenges, Keith, that you see in cities getting the right data into the system so that it can generate the sorts of answers that you showed other cities are beginning to generate. And you can just take this mic, just take it off, turn it, yeah, I think it's on.
The good news is that the data issue is not the issue that it was when I started out in GIS, which was if you wanted data, you created it. That was the only way to get it. There are so many different data providers and so many cities now. It is rare for us to find a city or a county that does not even have digitized parcels and zoning. That's really, really uncommon at this point. So I think that's a testament to how far geospatial technology has really evolved and how it's proliferated. And now it's just part of the mainstream. It's not a luxury anymore. It's just what people expect to be able to have. But the first axiom in GIS is garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't have accurate data, if your parcels are not accurate, and I mentioned that just about every county I've worked with has them. That doesn't mean they're always good, and I will not name names, but I've worked with counties and cities that have had data that was askew. It wasn't accurate. It wasn't edge matched properly. And it does two things. It limits their ability to do some of the things like what Anita showed, but then it also hurts them from a financial standpoint because that's what they're using for assessment purposes. And so if that data is not right, it hurts everyone. So,
Anita, what are you finding with the data issues here in the district as you try to ramp up your system? Can you take your mic here?
So I would say the major data issue, and it's starting to be resolved, which is why Nanny Helen Burroughs and Ivy City are ones that we're doing, is actually just making sure you have the base map. So the plans that we started a year ago or 2 years ago, we didn't have the base map. And so we could not present complete analysis. And so that was a challenge, but we're almost 100% where we need to be. So that challenge is less so for us.
Do you think that DDOT and other agencies will provide the kind of data that really allows you to do some of the sort of planning of bike routes and bus lanes and cars and all of the rest of it?
I do, mainly because DDOT, like OP, we are an agency that works with the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, and that's where kind of the centralized data sets really lie. We're really not creating our own data sets on our own and storing them in some file set over here. Our file sets either derive from or roll up to the Office of the Chief Technology Officer.
Good. Is there a question? William. You can just pull it out of there.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. My name is William Jordan from Columbia Heights neighborhood. And so my question really has to do with how are we using data from immediate experiences? So we have a lot of data from Columbia Heights because what I tend to see is the use of it for marketing, what we want to do, but how are we collecting data and implementing what we've already experienced over the last 20 years? So for instance, in racial equity, you could map Columbia Heights and show the displacement as the buildings have come online, and then use that later to explain Ivy City or some other places. So how are we using our current experience, our current data, and then using that experience versus just, cool stuff?
So my answer to that is going to kind of deviate from the visualization piece, because the answer is that, well, in some ways it will. One of the things that we're trying to do that is in the visualization piece is around utilization of story maps. And so that is one place where we can really show kind of over time how a neighborhood has changed and show those data points and attach the narrative to it to help that. We're not the only ones. OP is certainly not the only ones using story maps. Others are using story maps. Certainly Prolog DC and others who've been looking at issues of neighborhood change and displacement across the city are using that. And that's something that we reference. One of the ways that we really think about it is, or a technique that we're starting to use is, and we've used it in Ivy City, is called a data walk, and really understanding, okay, here's what we know in trends in data over time, and we're asking residents to say, okay, what about this data trend that you have is off? That what is missing? What is the lived experience that is not included in here that needs to be put alongside the showing of the trend line and what's changed over time in parcel by parcel or building by building?
Keith, what have you found with cities in response to William's question, so that they're integrating some of these social metrics and social trends into their projections?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different ways to go about that. What we're seeing is you'll have cities, especially when they're focusing on equitable distribution of resources, where developments, what cities or what neighborhoods are lacking open space, what neighborhoods are lacking access to grocery stores, certain types of services, healthcare, and so forth. They're able to use, so there's some data that's free and available online that would be able to denote that. The other one, though, that they would be using, they could use data from the public safety side of things, so be able to see, okay, where have we been getting the most calls for EMS, and not just where, but what time, what day, and then what time do those occur? Do we have facilities that are close enough to meet those needs? And so, and you could do the same for fire, for police, for parks and recreation, fill in the blank there, and be able to say, okay, based on our demographic data that we have, as well as projections, and then other curated data that's already set and ready to go, that data then can be overlaid on top of existing plans or used to influence those plans, to be able to say, okay, where do we need to put resources? Where do we have a real equity problem? And again, as I said before, when you take that route, it stops becoming an anecdotal discussion and it becomes data driven. It's not, well, I think we're, or I feel we're lacking resources in this area. We are lacking, and I can show what they are and what the problems are.
Anita, let me ask you about how you see working with communities to pull their ideas about scenarios into this tool.
So, in many ways, the pieces around, understanding our audience, understanding how we reach them, that kind of thing. We've got really leveraging some of the engagement opportunities that we have. We really want to take a look at those and see which ones might fit for bringing in this kind of technology. And I think in many ways we're going to need to kind of beta test it. So if there's anybody who's deeply interested in that, please reach out. And when I mean beta tested, I mean not at the meeting that's the meeting, but at a kind of preview and tell us what's not working and that kind of thing. So I think we want to look at all of those, whether it's the one-on-one meetings or the small group meetings or the large open houses or the town halls. We want to look at all of those and see, are there parts of this software that are helpful for those? Not as helpful, what adjustments might we need to make? But the answer is I'm not sure right now, and I sure could, and there's work for us to do to figure that out.
You know, I'm thinking of something like the Connecticut Avenue Design Guidelines. Now, there are different views on how those design guidelines might be laid out. And people in the community have views about that. How can those views then be modeled alongside with your original presentations?
So now that we have, as I mentioned, for kind of our forthcoming projects, now that we have all those, that data, and we'll be at, near 100% confidence about moving that forward, it's about designing. We need to design a approach that allows us to do that and lay out what that approach will be and start to carry that out. So that is the work for us to do, is to really design that out.
Yeah. And it's the work of your office also to seek the wisdom of those communities, their ideas, and be able then to feed back from this very visual system what the options might be so people understand. I realize that that's not a question to you. It's more of an assertion of what this technology can do. Keith, I'm interested in examples of places where you have seen this kind of citizen feed into the system so that people are saying, how about if we looked at it this way? Or how about if we reconfigured the development in particular ways?
Tacoma, Washington's a great example of that. So they essentially crowdsourced their housing situation to the public, and they said basically, and again they used GIS for this, but it was an online survey which Anita referenced, and a map, and allowed to say, okay, I live at this location, and then tell me about the housing situation. It could be the housing in our neighborhood is dilapidated. We don't have access to services. Things of that nature. And so they were able to crowdsource that from thousands of input and be able to come up with essentially a crowdsourced housing plan. It's called Home in Tacoma. And I'll send the link out so everyone can take a look at that. And I would say the last one would be in Decatur, Illinois. They used some ARPA funding that they had at their disposal to be able to deal with a specifically blighted neighborhood within the city. Again, using an online survey allowed the public to be able to say, hey, tell us what's wrong with your home. Because they've had millions of dollars to be able to put towards improvements. So is your HVAC system out? Is your roof, in need of repair, and so forth. So people were able to go online and then basically apply using about a 3-question questionnaire on the phone. And it helped the city leadership and the planning director as well to be able to say, this is where we need to focus our funds.
Good.
Yes. Good evening, and thank you for the presentation. Very informative. The question I have is how much is this technology incorporating I noticed in some of the renderings, you had trees placed in certain places. How much is things like the amount of tree canopy and other things like, for example, the flood risk or some of those kinds of situations being incorporated into the technology while you're in the process of doing this kind of planning?
Great. This is really an infrastructure question as well. Yeah.
Yeah. In general, tree canopy is that's becoming much more common in terms, and it's actually easier to do with programs like Urban and others that are out there, because you can actually put in different tree types that you're dealing with. It can also be extracted from imagery as well. We hear about AI all the time. That's actually not new to us in the GIS field. We've been doing that with imagery for a long time, to where we can actually train the computer to say, okay, if you see this, it's a tree canopy, like for a spruce tree or an oak tree or a willow and so forth, and be able to denote those. And then it can go through and say, oh, that's a dogwood. I know where those are, and can find them, and then measure the canopy of those trees within that area. So from a general perspective, that's doable within GIS.
And specifically in the district, understanding that tree canopy is really one of the most important solutions to heat island effect. It's something that we're certainly looking at in the context of Ivy City, where there are certainly heat islands and ways for us to think about how to resolve that in the context of the small area plan.
Well, what about, floodplains, and what about infrastructure? We plan these massive developments, and many of us go like, well, what is the carrying capacity of the water and the sewer in that area? I mean, how are we going to be able to analyze these things before development is a done deal?
So what I would say, that's an area that we need to look in more deeply. There's some standard information that comes through in urban. And I think one of the things for us is really, so this data comes through, and so what does that mean? Mm-hmm. There's this much associated with this particular development. What does that mean in the context of other developments that have been done recently? What does that mean in the context of just the overall, as you mentioned, infrastructure capacity? So we have not kind of answered those or got on a trajectory to have that conversation or have that dialogue be a part of our community meetings. So we need to do a little bit more looking into what Urban says. How does that compare to what we know? And just do some checking. So parcel level data, we're good. Zoning data, we're pretty good. There's other things that we need to do some more verification.
Great.
So those kind of projections are always, they're projections, right? And so the way that they're done in urban is, when I showed that model earlier for the fiscal impact analysis, same thing for water and sewer and so forth. It's based on the square footage and the type of use. Right, so we can put in parameters that say, okay, a residential use will have X amount of gallons a day based per square foot, and then that's going to be different for commercial, for retail, and so forth. But they're projections. So I mean, it's one of those things that, it depends how much faith you put in projections, not the program per se, but really the projections.
And to answer your question about floodplains, it's the same as for the infrastructure. Is that something we need to look at and verify before, putting that forward?
Go ahead, have another.
I would like to just interject a question, too, in the same theme, and that is, what is the relationship between green space, park space, and the kinds of residential buildings? Do you make that kind of, do you factor in that sort of information as well, or can you? For just sort of social peace, social calm, socialization, social equity.
Well, certainly in our visualizations, we definitely do that for the ones that we have that are a bit more static, like using Adobe Creative Suite and SketchUp, et cetera. We definitely show that both from a site plan perspective, how that works overall in a corridor, and then we also show it from the perspective of a building through a rendering and that kind of thing. We're, in terms of urban, certainly there are possibilities around that. And the question for us is, how do we make sure that what you see on a rendering, kind of, or what you see through ArcGIS Urban speaks to a rendering, because if it's much more kind of simplistic in nature, doesn't have the full design qualities, the texture and materials and other things that I was mentioning, how do you marry that alongside a type of visualization that does include those things, so that people understand that while you may be looking at this from a massing perspective or a site plan perspective, or how much water is retained on site, that you also have those textural details that are important, that are more difficult to show in urban.
Thank you, Committee for 100, for this presentation this evening. Thank you both. A quick question. I'm going to ask Anita. It's the same question for both of you, but it's two parts. In the sense, where is public safety in the prism of reviewing development from the Office of Planning? That's for you. Secondly, Anita, because my question is, I heard a little bit about public safety, Keith, in your presentation about where to deploy resources for public safety. But are there any other? I live in the U Street corridor. We have the highest over the last year violent crime and property crime in the middle of the city. And I'm trying to find my way out, and I want to know how to use these tools and how best to use them. And it sits in the zoning. It sits in zoning regs, like you shall promote safety. But can we bring it out here somehow, that there's the tool through your GIS system to promote or to scale and to monitor public safety as an important piece of this, any development, and especially where the stats are out of proportion for the area? And so then, but Anita, can we have a public safety prism on which Office of Planning looks at, along with the other items that you described this evening?
Okay.
So I think from a general standpoint, yeah, the benefit of a GIS is that it's layered. I can add multiple layers and use them for analysis. So typically in planning, we always think of, well, we have to have parcels, we have to have zoning, and then building footprints and so forth. But yes, I can always overlay additional data. So data from the RMS system, from a police department or a fire department, to be able to see, okay, what kind of activity has gone on in that area. So, I mean, we see that as pretty common. I wouldn't say necessarily, to your question about like day-to-day operations, I wouldn't say I've necessarily seen that, but those are typically meetings between departmental heads when they're talking about it from a big picture, when they're talking about a trend over a month, 2 months, a year, year-over-year changes and so forth, and then being able to visualize where that's occurring. And then the analysis can be, okay, what's the driver for that at this point? Do we have a lack of police presence in that area? Do we have, vacated stores or vacated homes? What is the driver for that? And then that can be a part of a holistic approach to the planning. But yeah, from our standpoint, and a general standpoint, it's another layer that can be added to help analyze planning decisions.
So as it relates to public safety, certainly Mayor Bowser is now asking for residents to really weigh in on those public safety priorities, and especially as it relates as we think about a new police chief. So from a program standpoint and initiative standpoint, certainly that's something that agencies definitely look at, including Office of Planning as it relates to some of the evaluation of cases that we look at. I'm going to have to talk with the team and see how that fits into a visualization context, because there is, how you look at data and data points. I'm not sure about kind of the visualization of buildings and parks and that kind of thing, how that, I just don't know right now. So I'll have to take it back to the team and
I would say that that's not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of context, and you have to have people that understand and can perform crime analysis data for you. So to me, the most dangerous thing is where they just throw you the crime data and say, figure out what the problem is here, Anita. It doesn't, there is usually context and nuance to that data that people that don't work in crime analysis wouldn't understand. So me among them. So.
Nick.
Thank you. I organized a coalition on DDOT bike plans, and my question is whether or not the new technology can be used in traffic planning. The city has embarked on an ambitious bike network, which is reckless, and the casual observer can see that. And in fact, when you look at some of the bike lanes, they're empty. There are not a lot of bikers in the city, and they're turning the city upside down in order to get this network in place. It seems as though the more technology we have, the more we move away from actual community engagement. And so that's my question.
So your question is, how can this technology be used better to analyze the effects of these kinds of changes?
You took the words out of my mouth. Thank you.
So yes, GIS is used in transportation planning. It's used by DOTs across the nation, including DDOT. So as far as planning, we usually I would defer on that one because I have a counterpart that's great on transportation. He could go into more detail than you would ever want. But we don't necessarily create transportation planning tools as much as we rely on our business partners to create that for us. So we focus on the core technology and have partners that create transportation planning tools. But yes, the answer is if you wanted to be able to do street design and so forth and be able to measure the impact, GIS absolutely does that.
Laura.
Hi, my question is for both of you, and I want to get a sense of how much these various, capabilities cost. If it's a real, budgetary item for cities that they have to take into account, and also how much computer capacity do homeowners need or just retail users need if they want to, view whatever is put out and ultimately start to manipulate these capabilities themselves, because that's what we're going to want to do. And I know that there is a relatively simple one on the Zoning Commission's website now that is not really that user-friendly, and even one of the commissioners has said he's had difficulty manipulating it. So how much does it cost, and how easy is it to bring this down to the user level?
Okay, so pricing. I didn't think I'd get pricing. That's good. No, that's fine. I'll get you a quote no, I'm just kidding. So ArcGIS Urban that we're talking about is, now I don't know the price. The Office of Planning is working on a contract that includes services, so I don't know. But the commercial price for ArcGIS Urban is $3,300. Okay, and so, and no, it's not. It's really not. And that's a web-based subscription. So you asked about computer capacity, and I'll go back to what I said earlier. I run Urban on my machine all the time, but it's okay because it's called a SaaS product, SaaS, software as a service, which means I don't have the software on my machine. It's somewhere else on a server. And so, so as long as I have an internet connection, I can use it.
Wow.
So did you have anything to add about how quickly DC can afford to kind of upgrade to give us all these things?
You said upgrade to do what?
To make sure that we have all of the different programs you've been discussing. I know you're bringing out some as a pilot program when you do Nanny Helen boroughs, and do most of the planners have them? Do you have one subscription per the office, or can all the planners work on it at the same time?
So we have multiple subscriptions, and kind of what we're doing is both, because it's not just about the subscriptions, it's about the services, it's about the training, it's about the customized consulting that you may need to go beyond what you would find on a website, right? And so, yes, so we do have, at this point, certainly we have the licenses that we need to be able to start that work and test some things out. This question about when can it get to your home, like that's the part that we don't have the answer to right now. But we endeavor to have one as soon as we can.
Yeah, I would say this also, that there's a way to be able to supply comments on ArcGIS Urban that would not require you to purchase an additional license. So that would be something I think down the road Office of Planning might look at and others, but I don't necessarily think, I'm sorry, I should not presume to talk. I don't think our design for this is really so that John Q. Public has their own licenses at home and they're coming up with different iterations that they're sending to Anita, which I'm sure you would appreciate. But that might be something that's done in a workshop, right? So maybe so from a resident engagement, that kind of thing, where maybe 4 or 5, I'm making work for Anita, she's going to throw something at me, but where you have something like, 4 or 5 laptops, you sit around and people come up maybe with different, play out different scenarios for proposed developments, that kind of thing. Sure.
Nancy.
Thank you both for being here tonight. My question is for Anita. Back in 2013, during the HITE Act discussions, Office of Planning did some remarkable and really essential visuals that they showed around the city at different community meetings that showed the different vistas and view sheds from North Capitol Street, from South Capitol Street, from K Street, across the city towards the waterfront, and visualized for residents what the different height options that were being discussed would look like in the city. And it was a really thrilling time for many of us who work on a lot of land use issues, because the assumption was, since the Office of Planning had put together this presentation, that this would now become an essential tool that would help to better inform people through visualizations. And here we are 10 years later, and it's still not being used. So my question is, why has it taken so long? But the other aspect of that, because I'm assuming it is going to come along very quickly now, is how soon will you be using it with regulatory bodies? For example, with the Zoning Commission. I could see incredible potential for this, for map amendments, for example. Explaining, visualizing for the Zoning Commission what medium density might look like from a zoning context, because there may be 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different zones that they could approve. And if you can show visually what the options would look like in the context of the particular map amendment, that's a game changer. So how soon will this be utilized more broadly?
That's a great question. And it's one where I will need to get back to you. We are kind of scoping out what that piece would look like, and need to have some conversations with Office of Zoning and others, because it's not just about what we're able to do, it's about what they might need to marshal as well as any of the other kind of decision-making bodies. But we share your desire, and commissioners and board members have told us that that's something that they would like to see. So we certainly share your initial assertion, Meg, that it's really important, and it's something that we need to bring to bear.
We have only about 5 more minutes, so I'm going to say that the folks in line can ask their questions, but that's it. And then we will have some opportunity for closing comments.
Thank you. My question is for Keith. You mentioned in your presentation that this technology could be used to help improve notice to residents. When you said when you practice planning, there was posting on properties, and I'm curious if you can speak a bit more about that and what that might look like, and if any of your users have used it for that purpose.
Yeah, so it's something that's near and dear to my heart just because I experienced it, and I was in a planning department where we got lots of calls as soon as that bright yellow annoying sign was in someone's yard and they passed it. They would call the planning department and go, what my favorite question, I'm sure you get this, what are you guys doing? It's always my favorite. Like it was just us arbitrarily going out and saying, well, we're going to rezone this property now. Someone petitioned for it. And so, as I mentioned before, I think people's input at that point was limited. Now, some of that was by technology. But what we're seeing now is as more, and so again, if you weren't there Tuesday at 7:00, you felt like you didn't have a voice. Your other option was to call up and complain to the planning department, which I got those calls. That was fun. But as I stated before, I think it can lead people to think, okay, if you didn't show up at the planning commission meeting, you don't care about your community, which I think is false. People have a lot of stuff to do. And so I think with the technology that's available today, I think for better or for worse, we've all been trained that we want to be able to get feedback and give feedback instantaneously through social media, through whatever, right? A Yelp review, who knows? That should also pertain to planning as well. And again, the benefit of it is not just to give and I thought I loved Anita's slide where she was showing the different types of engagement. I think you're hitting all corners at that point. You're hitting, someone is going to be able to be drawn to one of those ways to be able to engage. And I just think that as city governments, they have an obligation to leverage technology to be able to get as many people involved as possible, so that again, you feel that as a planner, that the plans that you are going forward with, you actually have buy-in. You're not getting it from everyone, but you're getting it from a lot of people, and you feel like you're not charging into it solo. So
I would only add to that I think many of us have felt over the years that we didn't know what happened to the sticky notes that get put on the boards, what I call too much sticky note planning. And I think that to the degree that those ideas can begin to take visual form and not just be sort of marks on a chart, you will get much better resonance with the residents in their planning. And I cannot urge strongly enough the speed with which we need to get up to speed and make this happen. For our last question.
To echo that theme, I think this is a very exciting tool and powerful tool that can be used for more involvement, citizen engagement. And one of the features that you mentioned is not only the visualization, which I guess the Office of Planning has done a lot with the residents of visualization, but also it was able to calculate the revenue. Like, I don't know if it's the tax base or whatever of different things. And I've been involved most recently on a project at 16th and U where the city is proposing to get rid of the police and fire station, at least temporarily, and build a 9+ luxury housing apartment. And I was thinking, some of us who've been looking at that we're thinking, what if you just build it all as affordable housing instead of having a 9-foot tall building and had all affordable housing? Obviously, what you were saying was you wouldn't have the same revenue and that sort of thing. But I mean, it would be very useful. Anita, you were asking for a beta site. I mean, maybe that would be a good beta site for using this tool to figure out what some of the options would be. So I'd just like to encourage the use of this, for planning with citizens going forward. Thank you.
Well, would you each like to close by saying what excites you about being able to use this to really meet the needs of the residents that you serve?
So I think what excites me is that I think one of the things that excites me is these conversations and how much excitement we have from residents about seeing this. That makes us think about, using your term, the resonance with the residents. I like that concept, and that's something that when we talk about accessibility, racial equity, and impact, resonance with residents is really important, both from a process standpoint and an outcome standpoint. So the idea that people see this kind of software technology being right in the center of that is exciting in and of itself.
I would just reiterate a point I made earlier. I think whenever I'm involved in any of these projects, I think back to back in 1994, 95 when I was starting, and how far, not just the technology, because technology is always advancing, but I think to me the exciting part is what it puts in the hands of planners, what this technology puts in the hands of planners who are the subject matter experts. At the time when I was doing this, when someone was standing over my shoulder, I was not the subject matter expert. I had someone that was telling me what to put on there. And now that you have the subject matter expert to be able to go in there and be able to play out these scenarios, plan their community, design it, again, with input from the public, that's what really inspires me, is thinking about how far we've come and what planners, especially like the students, the ones that are coming out of school today, they take it for granted. I almost called them whippersnappers once. But you think about, man, they're about to take off into this field, and the tools that they have to be able to do it, it's I can't wait to see what they do.
I would like to just close by saying that I think citizen education about these tools is terribly important. And I think, based on what my experience with much earlier generation of these tools was, that people will quickly learn what is just a massing diagram and what is a more refined, textured diagram. And I don't think you should be shy about using them here in the city, as long as people come to understand how these tools are assembled, what they can tell you and what they can't tell you. And the sooner, the better. And thank you both so much for coming.